Sorry about that. Yes, recording now. This evening's webinar using data to help you develop and support volunteers and staff at your station. Once again, got to give it up to the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, paying respects to elders past, present and emerging. Hopefully this is recording at the moment. Yes, it is recording. Thank you so much to our guest speaker for this evening, Dr. Ramon Wenzel, who's the PhD Research Assistant Professor in the Business School of the University of Western Australia. He's also a member of the Centre for Social Impact. He's the Chief Investigator of the Australian Not-for-Profit Workforce Study, which I believe is what we'll be discussing mainly here this evening. Fantastic to have such a noted academic here helping us out here with the community broadcasting sector in this session. We're going to gain understanding about what drives work engagement and performance at your station, receive science-based advice to make your employees and volunteers stay, learn and be happy, and get access to free workforce analytics to measure and identify better ways so your work practice meets its purpose. And Assertion will also provide an introduction to the Workplace Analytics Dashboard, the link to which was available via the registration page. Hopefully you've checked that one out. I will pop that link up in just a little bit. It's an online tool that will help you assess how well your organisation and people are doing, referencing key metrics important to your workforce, organisation and impact. Now, Ramon, I'll let you take back the screen if you'd like, sir.
Sure, absolutely.
Just do what you did before, and I will leave it up to you to provide a bit of knowledge for our wonderful community broadcasters.
Let me see.
Excuse me. So what I might need to do is, there we are, all yours.
Okay. Can I ask, do you see me or do you see the slides at the moment?
We're seeing both of those things. You're in a little
Great.
box and your
Fantastic.
Slides are the main part of the screen.
Okay, then welcome everyone and thank you so much for having me. I plan to speak for roughly 30 plus minutes and then open this really up for Q&A. It's intended to give you a broader overview about quite a lot of things, but it's not to make things complicated. It's rather to have a narrative, and that narrative is about how we come about understanding and building thriving, healthy, and engaging, radio stations or workplaces, if you will. And workplaces really is about employees and volunteers. So when I say workers or staff, I really mean all of those, because these people involved dedicate their time to something that isn't particularly their hobby, or let's say that isn't their private life, and they do this and we for something that we may deem work, at least for that purpose here. Very few words on me and the background and so on. So I am a research assistant professor at the Centre for Social Impact. I am in Perth. There are 3 nodes throughout Australia. The other 2 being in Sydney and Melbourne. And I actually just come from Brisbane and just gave a talk to the Community Legal Centre conference in Queensland. So also on a very similar topic here. And I have been doing this for the last few years, and the whole activity or range of activity is organized under an initiative which I founded and called Learning for Purpose. The a reason for that is there wasn't anything like it, and there was arguably a need to bring together certain topics, questions, and science as it relates to people and the management and leadership of people and organizations in a non-profit context. We work with different researchers across Australia and internationally, and what you see here and going forward is the result of some years of work that have been also funded and supported through the Australian Research Council, the linkage partners such as the Australian Scholarships Foundation, EY, and it goes back to other partners we had like Origin Energy Foundation and Australian Executor Trustees. And it wouldn't be possible to do this type of work without them. All right, let's get started. And I want to basically convey that this is probably what you seek to do. You seek to do or what is necessary to provide great radio experiences to different people and communities out there. And they come from different walks of life, and you may have also different mandates, such as providing journalistic services, great music, all the things that go into your work, including the back office work, the organizing these stations, the technical bits and pieces. Now, to do this, it requires also a great number of different people. And it's about those having a certain type of work experience every given day they're dealing with any of the topics they are tasked to address. And we know for a fact that these work experiences define how well people can do their job and how they perform and how much impact they have. Essentially, work experiences define how great the radio can be that you put out there. And so I want to talk about some of the dilemma that we face. Some people may get burned out, some change employer because they don't grow where they are. Some opt out of that career path altogether. Some may not perform the way they would like to or can't be as innovative for various reasons. And I'm not saying it's all doom out there, but clearly there are these issues where we can do better. And it's not just about compliance or mitigating the negative, but it's also and foremost about promoting thriving workplaces and promoting really great work experiences, building those so that people can be the best they can be. I want to talk about basically three things and end on the fourth. So I want to talk about capacity building, but more in a probably through a slightly different lens than these terms are typically being used. Then I want to share some research findings with you, such so that you go away and don't think I'm just making bottomless claims, but that we have very robust evidence to support the claims and thereby encourage you to go down a certain path. And then I want to introduce to you a number of tools and opportunities that are available to you, namely the people analytics or workforce analytics platform we started to build, of which there's more to come, already something great out there that you can make use of. And so then I finish on the where to next, what you may want to do, but also then want to hear your questions and suggestions and so on. Does that all make sense? Then I just continue on. If there is something that you want to bring up, please let me know. I put this chat up here on another screen, and hopefully if you do have an immediate question, please bring it up. I want to talk about capacity building as an evidence-based organizational leadership activity. What does that mean? It means some of the things that I'm trying to describe to you now. Let me start where the world currently sort of is sometimes. On the left-hand side, you see a chart that says 70, 20, 10. And these proportions are often alluded to that 70% of all learning comes from informal learning, 20% from coaching and mentoring, and 10% from formal learning. And now I'm just coming from Queensland, I mentioned this, and the weather wasn't so good coming into Perth, and actually coming into Queensland 2 days earlier wasn't too great either. So I was in that plane and I landed safely and all as well. But if all the learning we gather from 70% of informal learning, then the dilemma would be that probably more issues would happen. I don't want all the knowledge and skills that the pilots have to just be coming from 70% of informal learning. I move on, and you slowly will acknowledge where I'm going with this. In the middle, you see a person by the name of Amy Cuddy, a former academic, who claimed that if you pose in certain ways, this will mess with your testosterone and cortisol, and as a result, you feel much more confident, and so on and so forth. And on the right-hand side, you see another chart which shows 16 quadrants, which is called the Myers-Briggs Personality types, which you can do some psychometric tests, and apparently it suggests to you what you are, who you are, and what you like. And all of these things are not particularly evidence-based, so they might be intuitive and they might be appealing, but and clearly many of those and others are popular, but there isn't enough empirical support to suggest they are true or they work very well. And as I said earlier, there might be a lot of informal learning happening for different people, different roles, but maybe not for others. So a universal claim like 70-20-10 isn't true. There's also a claim on this sort of power posing, as it's called, which more than 24 other studies ever since have tried to replicate and couldn't replicate these effects. And these other studies were much more transparent and couldn't replicate it. And nevertheless, there's a bestseller out there and people believing these ideas. And on the other side, there's this Myers-Briggs type framework, which is used for selection, recruiting, and coaching, and so on and so forth. And in fact, it does come from academia. It started more than 50, 60 years ago. But for the last 20 or so years, we know pretty well it doesn't explain much, if anything. And yet it's really hard to get rid of. And the case I want to make is if we continue to work with ideas or concepts or processes that have been invalidated, then there's a problem and we shouldn't be doing this. Instead, what we should be doing is look into other examples that suggest how it should be done, such as medicine. You wouldn't take a pill, most likely, that you wouldn't trust that there isn't a mechanism that controls this and has validated that it at least can have some very positive effect in most cases. And so there's a lot of medical development that never sees the daylight because it isn't really working that systematically or reliably and so on. Equally, I mentioned the air traffic control on the right-hand side that I experienced indirectly over the last few days. And on the left-hand side, you see the last bridge that was built in Perth, and it's a very neat one, but it doesn't look like a typical bridge. It's a bit more interesting from an architectural design perspective, but you want to be sure that the people building this rely on principles that are really evidence-based. Now, we would say these ideas that I'm trying to illustrate here should also apply to when we lead our people and organizations and your radio stations. And it is that you owe these same principles to your people and mission. And arguably, it's a bit harder sometimes because there might not be this true universal law that this one thing works and this other doesn't when we talk about people. But we know that there are things that work better than others. And we also know that there are principles that have been established or mechanisms that have been observed and so tested and so on that work better than others. And just because leading people in an organization isn't a regulated profession doesn't mean that there aren't things that people should simply ignore. And so we want to address some of these this potential, and we do this by bringing up a framework of evidence-based leadership, meaning if we integrate where does this come from, this dilemma? It's sort of the tradition in fact starting at the bottom. It's sort of these oversimplified things or myths that never go away, that people just know they're true and then they may not be, but they're available, they are just around and everywhere. And then there's professional expertise, the things that we are educated in and maybe that we update once in a while. But depending on who you go to, what the body is that suggests these skills or where you have learned them, they may not be so up to date, or it's a long time ago that you actually experienced a learning experience like that. And then there are your analytics within the organization that you could possibly conduct, so to understand what's really going on in your case. And then there is scientific literature, which is probably the most trustworthy because it is self-correcting. For the most part. It's not to say science knows everything, but global scholarship over several decades brings about a certain a trend in many respects for whatever you're interested in. And there are cryptic or hard to access pieces of literature which I'm not claiming you should read or this should be on your hobby, but it's probably where we should locate these different sources of information. And if we acknowledge that none of these are perfect or ideal, and so what we try to do is bring some of these together, especially the top two. The other aspect I want to make you aware of is a framework that comes out of the UK, and it's called evidence-based practice. Simply, or good practice and how you come to good decision. And it involves asking very good questions, translating a real issue into an answerable question. Then you would go about acquiring, the evidence that you need. And you search for it systematically and judiciously, and you appraise it based on something that I just showed before, something like this, to say, where does it come from, how trustworthy is it, and what was maybe the origin of it, and so on, to begin with. And you appraise it and also appraise the actual relevance of something that you found. And then you integrate and weigh this evidence. And thereby you can then incorporate some of the signals that you collated in, make a very good decision, or at least a better decision than just relying on your intuition or tradition. And ultimately you would evaluate any decision you made and see what has the outcome been, and has the process we have been using been better than others, at least having it used multiple times, and has it originated in better, has it resulted in better decisions that we make here. So that's more to make you aware of where we are coming from with this. I want to also share something that you may or may not be aware of. Science is, as I was saying, largely self-correcting, meaning you can do any study and find this or that, but ultimately it doesn't mean that you have fully understood the universe. However, if you do 10, 20, or 100 studies on a certain phenomenon or relationship, you get to a certain trend, perhaps, namely that you might have the occasional outlier or the occasional counterintuitive result. But if you put it all together, you will then see certain trends emerging. And this is what we call meta-analysis, or a study of studies that integrates all existing evidence on a certain lens or phenomenon. And so this exists in all kinds of discipline, and also in the social sciences and psychology as it relates to work. And so what we know, for instance, is that people who are more exhausted emotionally, well, they're less satisfied with their job, right? That is maybe something you would say, so what, I knew this already, but we can then build a case upon this. And we know this in this instance from 82 studies with more than 30,000 participants. And equally, we also know that psychological safety, namely an experience people have in their workplace where they say, I feel okay to admit a mistake, or I feel totally okay to say around here, I don't know exactly how this works or how I do this, and I just bring this up so I can learn. And in fact, this is what happens. If people feel okay to do these things, they learn, because it immediately triggers then in the environment a conversation, let me show this to you, or let us work out so this mistake doesn't happen the next time again, and so on. And good things will happen. But only if people have this sort of psychological safety. And we know this, again, from across a number of studies with thousands of participants. So we looked at some of these, or many of these, mechanisms, and identified those phenomena that are very robust and very predictive of the things that you probably care about, like people feeling good, people being motivated, people being able to perform. And here I want to show you some, or share some findings with you from the Australian not-for-profit workforce study. The typical work experience is probably characterized by a number of different dimensions, and it's fair to say that what you see here characterizes or reflects a typical work experience. You can sort of classify this into these categories. Namely, you got performance, that's what you care about, right? So that's more an outcome. But preceding that is engagement or motivation. It's about learning, it's about the well-being and health. It's about the leadership, it's about the work design, probably the most underrated or off the radar lens, how we actually design jobs, and so they can promote good things, and people systems or HR systems or volunteer management systems. And if you take these larger themes, you can then try to understand and share what works in what way and for whom. That's exactly what we try to do. And we went out last year and for the first time in a large scale, and invited all volunteers and employees from all states and sectors and all organizational sizes to participate in a study. It's, just under 4,000 people participated. We enriched this data with data points from the ACNC, the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and it's a very comprehensive survey, and it already is arguably the largest, most comprehensive of its kind. And so then if you take these dimensions or themes that I alluded to, it's probably fair to say they would be looking like this if you organize them in a more heuristical model. Namely, on the right-hand side, you see performance or impact. And that's being brought about by people being motivated or engaged in their work. And they also then need to be having the feeling that they are developing or learning, because motivation is nothing that just comes about. It's triggered or driven by other factors, such as people feeling they're growing around here. This is a great sort of place to be in order to get where I want to be, and part of that is a growing or learning experience. Another one is health and well-being. So this is not just having a fruit bowl somewhere in the office. This is about being able to have that, or having the energy to do what I need to do, or the opposite, being too fatigued to do what I need to do. And if people feel well, they are more motivated to do what they're asked to do or what they even want to do. And another aspect is leadership, which directly influences motivation, how sort of this place is being led, what the current flavor is here, and how this all feels, and superiors are dealing with subordinates, if you will, or even peers with peers, and the leadership behaviors that are typical around here. But these leadership behaviors also influence, for instance, what learning can emerge, and so on and so forth. And this is how this all interacts or integrates. And I don't ask you to remember this exactly, but what I want to show you is how more specifically we have been able to measure this and are able to demonstrate these relationships. And that's probably more interesting to make a case here. So on the right-hand side, you see operational excellence. That's things like cash flow and retention and other important factors for the organization. We also have organizational impact, namely how much of a positive difference do we make to beneficiaries. And we know that the better people perform in their role, the better for the operational excellence. Also, innovative behaviors are key, because these are it's not about being creative or drawing a picture. It's about seeking out new ways of doing things that may be more efficient or better and more effective, more in tune with your audience, for instance, or with the technical abilities you want to put out there, etc. And we know that this type of work performance or innovative behavior is to a large degree driven by how confident people feel, the self-efficacy. We know this not just from our study. This is actually ancient old, if you will. For decades, we know that women giving birth that feel more confident can or experience less pain and have shorter labor. Athletes in sports who feel more confident typically get better results and so on. It's not about being blindly optimistic, but it's about feeling that I can do this, and I have knowing what resources I have available, and I'm the biggest resource that I have, and there are things you can do to build this self-efficacy. I want to just briefly allude to the numbers where you see plus or minus and point something. All the numbers are always between 0 and 1. And there might be a plus or a minus, which simply indicates directionality. There's nothing there that is better or worse inherently. A plus or minus isn't better or worse. It's simply showing that there's a positive or negative correlation. So on the left side, you see X goes up, Y goes up, and on the middle, you see X goes down and X goes up and Y goes down. So for instance, the positive correlation would be it gets hotter and more beer is being sold. Or in the middle, it gets hotter and less umbrellas are being sold. And then we have another case where there's rather noise and no relationship. And we can measure this and draw a line through it, and then we see that there's a sort of an angle to this, and this is a 0 between 0 and 1. We can also say, oh, look, we haven't actually measured a certain proportion, and that's fine. But we know that certain effects based on previous studies hold true, and they're systematic, and so thereby we don't have to measure them now. We can make legitimate claims about them, and that's what we do here. We have measured that, and we then derive certain claims, or basically say we can legitimately advise that these are good things you should consider. This one shows work engagement, which is sort of the motivation of the people in the last 4 weeks when taking the survey. And we know that those who are more motivated perform better, show more innovative behaviors, and they also have less intention to leave. More so, work satisfaction, a more global perception of an individual about how great this place is, reduces the intention to leave. And this equally applies to volunteers. So take your radio station, the people who are more satisfied won't leave. Now you say again, perhaps this is a no-brainer. Of course that's so, but let me then show you a number of aspects that address work engagement and work satisfaction in order to address the intention to leave and the performance and other things that sort of sit at the at the tail end of this sort of sequence here. For instance, on the left-hand side, you see a dozen different learning experiences, and I won't go into those individually, but they are not just putting people into a training room. They are also about peer learning and having expert content, access to expert content, for instance, or knowledge sharing with peers. Having a developmental plan, being deliberate about my growth, and so on and so forth. And this leads to self-efficacy, because suddenly people realize if they have these experiences and exposure, what they can do and how they can do this, and that leads to good things. Equally, on the well-being side, if people experience psychological distress, they are less engaged. And if people have much work to family conflict, they are also less satisfied. So work to family conflict describes basically that people may not make it to dinner at home because of work, or they're not having the social interactions they want because there's just too much going on and they're not really present, and so on and so forth. And if these experiences become too regular, too much, people get disengaged and they're less satisfied with, flow-on effects, and these downstream outcomes I alluded to earlier drive people out of the organization or drive them to be to give less effort. We also know something about leadership, namely empowering leadership is something we looked into specifically, and that is a concept that has been out there for decades, but it's becoming more and more important, because whereas in the past you might have said and seen the heroic individual singular leader who is bailing out others, knows everything, and sort of has been around the block, we know that most operations these days require distributed sort of knowledge to work together, where there are many experts. They may not be all formal leaders or formal superiors or all in charge of everything, but we require everyone to sort of be an expert in something, and there's no one really that can replace him or her. And if that is so, then the best type of leadership that we can build around here is to empower everyone to be the best they can be given the mandate they have. And so that requires to share as much information as possible, to put autonomy or give autonomy to the people, to show concern and coach people to success. This all takes time. This isn't a trivial pursuit, but we know it greatly works, and it then gives people a sense of meaningfulness, because it's not that they are always micromanaged. It rather allows them to do what they think is best, and for the most part, that works really well. And then as a result of that, we see that empowering leadership drives self-efficacy, work satisfaction, work engagement, and so on. And lastly, or the last real focal point here, I want to allude to something that is perhaps the most underutilized lens, and that's about work design. Namely, here I take the example of beneficiary contact. Beneficiary contact alludes to someone having a real physical or a real opportunity in a physical sort of space to meet a human or some living and breathing being that their service or purpose is serving. So in the community radio space, that would be maybe your listeners. And that is very hard for some to pull off and easier for others. It can be more rewarding to have these work experiences where you get the feedback from your client base. And in fact, the evidence shows that if that happens at least once or twice a year, for instance, there is a real interaction going on where people get not just feedback about what could go better, but also hear the good things and how much this is worth to them, and how it enhances their life. People are more basically that this enhances the social worth of your volunteers and employees, and they have a higher degree of meaningfulness, and that has great flow-on effects. I'll give you an example. You may say that your people directly broadcasting have that interaction via Twitter or call-in and emails, etc. But how about those who do the finance and in the back office, some other mundane work, or in the marketing arena? Are they in contact with your ultimate beneficiaries? If not, why not? And could that change? And it's not about having that interaction going on every day, but it could be that these interactions happen once or twice or 3 times a year, and that really contributes to the meaningfulness of everyone's work. Here I'll leave you with high-performance work systems or HR people system dimensions, how much is communicated in terms of HR practices and policies, how fair are promotions, how good is our recruiting and selection process, and then this has also flow-on effects onto the work satisfaction engagement more generally. But I don't want to focus on this too much. I want to now slowly shift to to the section that you might have been most waiting for. But to sum this up, we have just shared some highlights of the research findings we have to date, and we are continuing that research. We encourage you to contribute to it, but we also want you to benefit from it. So now I want to shift to people analytics, or tools to support your purpose or your operation. What does it involve? Well, we are very serious about providing an immediate benefit to all those who believe this type of research should happen. And we also believe that research should have a direct impact onto the world out there and not just be an afterthought. So what we built is what we coined the Workforce Analytics Dashboard. It's what you see currently is the first generation. There's more in the making, which is exciting, and I can share a few bits and pieces later, perhaps if there's interest and questions. But for now, it is this amazing piece of relatively easy of a relatively easy to use platform, and there's a lot of magic that happens in the background. So here's how this works. Any employee or volunteer who is completing or responding to the Australian not-for-profit workforce study contributes to your organizational workforce analytics dashboard. And that works by them simply nominating or indicating where they work. There's a very long list available. They type in community radio station XYZ, and just by typing the first few characters, they get a pull-down menu auto suggestion, and they pick their place. Then this gets automatically anonymized, aggregated, and analyzed for you. And you then can see the aggregate insights on the dashboard. And all you need to do is sign up for free, and it's yours. And it sits online. There is no app to install or nothing to set up. It's just there and it works. And I will now try to bring up this dashboard online. You can actually do this yourself if you wanted to. If you go to learningforpurpose.org and you go to research and workforce analytics dashboard, you would see this page. And that's really the page where there's a bit of explanation around it, and where you then ultimately can sign up. You got some FAQs up here. We take privacy very serious. We are not sharing any of the data. There's never going to be any names being shared or anything like that. And if you were to click on the top section where this little animation is, you end up at the demo version of this dashboard. And you might have done this already if you clicked on the link that was provided earlier. And this is exactly what you would get, however, underlying with your organizational data. You see some statistics up here of those who have participated. So you get a sense of how many respondents, and is this roughly the distribution that you would typically have in your workplace when it comes to gender and age and so on and so forth. And then you have the different themes that I alluded to earlier. You have engagement and learning and development and well-being and leadership, people systems, work design. You can explore these themes. They each are characterized or comprise a number of specific measures that we have implemented. And this is not just one item people responded to, but typically something between 3 and 10 items. These are highly validated psychometrics that are used by academics and scholars around the world. And you find some explanation here, what they each mean and why they actually matter. And then you see how you do on average. So you have a bit of an index, and you can compare this to other organizations. So you have a benchmark. And then most importantly, you have a distribution. How many of your people believe this is a good learning organization? How many people feel psychologically safe to admit a mistake or show and employ themselves without fear? You see how people engage in different learning experiences in your organization. You see the level of psychological distress, work fatigue, work to family conflict, and so on and so forth. You see the different dimensions of empowering leadership. I will not go into this much further because I believe you can explore this yourself. I want to point out a few features. You can easily filter between volunteers only and employees only, or both. So in some cases, these different work groups have very different experiences, and so we may not want to bunch them all together, so you can just filter that respectively. You can also filter that by gender, and in the future there will be more drill down features. You can also print your report if you want to. You basically get then everything that you see here in a page format, and you may put this into a PDF, or you may also print it out and share it with your board or whatever you do. Another feature that hasn't been mentioned yet, and that's quite important, is that each individual that you're asked to complete the study online, each one immediately will get, sorry, this is just getting in the way. Oh no, oh no, hold on. I need.
I think your camera's gone down a little bit there, mate.
Yeah, sorry about that. Now I will have to just start up the sharing again. Bear with me.
No worries at all. And while you're doing that,
Yep.
if anyone does have any questions, Q&A box would be the best place to place them for the time being. And of course, also, if people wish to sort of use their mics to ask their questions, that's an option as well. Just put your hands up if you want that. I'm assuming that's still loading, Ramon?
Yep. Though I'm not sure how I am bringing up the sharing option again.
Yep.
Can you assist?
Yes. So if you go to, so you're the one.
Okay, I think.
Yeah,
No, here we are.
Share button. Yep. There we are. You're back.
Okay, great. We're back. Sorry about that. Just a wrong click. So there's a feature which is also available automatically without anything that anyone needs to do to every respondent. So if you complete the survey, or your staff does, they get their personal analytics report, and that's immediately generated, and there's nothing anyone needs to do in terms of registering. It basically gives people an insight into a number of important topics, such as their professional learning and development, how much hours they work, the sleep, fatigue, job autonomy, job complexity, and many other things. And you can, again, check this out yourself. And now, what I want to point out is it is not meant to say, criticize their current experience and say, oh, what a rubbish workplace, get the hell out of there, because I have heard these concerns before. It is framed in a very positive way as to allow people to reflect on their experience and what they possibly could do in order to improve it further. And in fact, we received much positive feedback from people to say, I reflected on my work experience and I actually like what I'm doing, and I now identified these one or two things that I may need to work on or that I want to address. And this sort of report and the survey gave me a framework to do this. They gave me some language, and this is really helpful. So what I want to end with is you would go simply to, if you want to check this out, you would do two things. One is to sign up for the Workforce Analytics dashboard. You are going to that web page and you see sign up for your dashboard here. And there's not much information we require other than who you are. And we use this information to then have a sort of manual vetting there. And that sounds scarier than it is. What we do is we make sure you are indeed you, and you work where you, and you are indeed working where you claim you work, so that when we hand out this access to the dashboard to you, we don't hand it to someone else who shouldn't have access to it. Granted, there's never going to be any personal information in the dashboard. It requires 5 or more people to begin with that provided their response in order for you even not to be able to re-identify them. And once you got that access, you can then also share the dashboard with anyone you would like, because you don't actually create an account here. you get a code, and you simply plug that code with your email address into your login window, and off you go. And people know your email address anyway, and you get the code, which you can share. You don't have to, but then you may share it around the organization to enable conversation. And that's really what it is. It's a conversation enabler, but an evidence-based one, and allows you to identify from a plethora of things, maybe the 2 or 3 pockets or topics that are perhaps in need of more attention than others. And ultimately, you would have to suggest and encourage others to complete the online survey, which is just the other side of the same coin. And it says start survey, so you again go to research learning, and you have Australian not-for-profit workforce study. And it says it provides a lot of information that is useful to people, again, on privacy and what this is and how this works. And I can say it takes about 27 minutes on average for a given individual. People in the upper ranges of an organization, like in HR or CEOs, they may get a few more questions about the organizations that a frontline person wouldn't be able to answer, obviously. And there is the suggestion to log in so that we can provide you with this individual report. But you could even skip this if you wanted to. And off you go. And you can pause this, especially if you have logged in by using your email address, and you can do this 10 minutes today, 10 minutes tomorrow or so. You may just do it over lunch in one go. And that's what the experience is going to be like. And that's it. So at the end, you do get something like this that's very comprehensive, and we have been told very useful. And you also can click on further links that say learn more about this concept, that then give you access to free resources, which we are currently curating. I'm not claiming this is a finished process, but this is a evidence-based curation or further readings that someone like you or people who work with might be interested in to better understand, all right, so what can we do about work engagement, for instance? And so right now I clicked on this at work engagement, and I have a database that's just loading with that particular keyword in mind, and I have a number of resources that we have curated with a bit of an abstract. You can further filter this and say, I want to rather read or see a video on work engagement, and then you only are having one option presented to you. And we believe everything in this database to date is very robust. It's not a fad, and can be very helpful. So I think timing wise, I leave it as at that point, and I would welcome any questions you have. It's probably useful to ask them, and I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Excellent. Well, I'll be asking, thank you so much for that. That was wonderful. I'll be asking our first question on behalf of long-time listener, first-time caller, John Maisels, who's used the Q&A message box. He says he leads a sector support non-for-profit member organisation. It's completely virtualised, so no bricks and mortar presence, and all efforts are volunteer. Can he apply this process to the board of that organisation and the members, and what might such an effort tell him about how to manage that volunteer board better?
Okay, great. So that's a good question. I believe the very brief answer is yes, it will provide benefits. And the more elaborate response is your board is possibly 8 to 10 people strong. And there is, once you go beyond 3 or 4 people, then a group becomes or has certain dynamics. There are always louder voices, people who are more established than others, and allowing everyone to report on their individual experience and perception, and seeing this on aggregate, and for instance seeing how many people within that board, what's the proportion of people feeling psychologically safe. I think that can be very useful. granted that it may be that the board is not as active, and this doesn't eat into their fatigue or into their family life. Maybe it does, I don't know. Though I believe there is something in there for the board. Clearly there is something in there for the remainder of the organization, everyone else that is. And it doesn't matter if they're all volunteers. There are a couple of questions that people may say, hey, wait a minute, I'm a volunteer. But if people indicate they are a volunteer, then a number of questions aren't shown, and some questions are shown that also equally apply to volunteers. And I believe you get a good sense of what's going on there and what might be some of the issues. It's probably useful to simply try it out. And in this particular case, and this is useful also to all the other listeners here, if you have an organization that is bigger than, let's say, 5 or 10 people, and there are very distinct organizational units, your board or different jurisdictions or marketing and sales and journalistic unit, whatever it is, you can, when you sign up right here where it says teams units, you can simply tell us that you would like a dashboard for each of these units. So you still get your global organizational dashboard, but you also get a dashboard for each of these units, and you can drill down into each of these and provide it to each of those. And so there isn't that much noise then compromising the view and the insights you gain. So that's just an additional feature, an optional feature that you can make use of. And in this case, I would suggest that.
He follows that up with the question, also, what evidence supports the assertion that Myers-Briggs is debunked?
A lot. If I can get back to you on this, I provide you with heaps of resources that you can digest in your own time, where this is has been debunked, and this is. It's an unfortunate dilemma that it is so strong, and there are accreditation bodies or business models built around it, but it isn't much predictive of anything. There are other personality models or frameworks that are more useful for selection purposes, and they have dimensions like conscientiousness, neuroticism, openness to experience, and so on, but they don't put you into personality type and say you are this or that. They're more operating on a spectrum. And unfortunately, Myers-Briggs hasn't turned out to be really valid and reliable.
Excellent. All right. Bill McGillivray probably asks a less contentious question. Can you see more of your work without signing up for the workplace analytics?
So I mean, go to learningforpurpose.org, and we had a roadshow in mid-year, and the report that we shared there in hard copy will become available online. But learningforpurpose.org shares some resources already. So unless I'm not understanding the question, when you say, can you see more of your work, what perhaps do you have in mind that I could respond to? What type of work do you mean?
I'll see if Bill taps anything in there.
Sure.
And John reiterates that his household will be very interested in the Myers-Briggs stuff.
Great.
I don't know, interesting discussion around the dinner table there. I don't know if anyone else has got any questions. We've got about 5 minutes left on the clock for this evening's webinar. The reason that Bill wanted to hopefully see some more of your work was for the committee at his station to review that information and check out what's going on with that. So I don't know if you've got any links handy with you. I might get you to just chuck them into the instant message box, if that's all right. And what I'll do is I might take control of the slides here in a second, just so I don't know if it gives me the power to do so. Yeah, so that might sort of be if you're able to sort of put a link in the instant message box, people will be able to access that from there. Helen, yes, this webinar is going to be available to listen to again, depending on how long the rendering of the video takes for me. It should be up as early as tomorrow by any chance. And we'll also be sending out sort of any extra resources that we have to everyone who has signed up for this evening's webinar. We've been very lucky in that we've been able to get a lot of traction there in regards to checking out our webinars after the fact. We obviously prefer people to be here live if at all possible. But if you're checking it out afterwards, no problem with that whatsoever.
So I invite for further questions, and whilst you might think of the last one or two questions here, I basically just want to go over what are the next steps, and we believe it would be for you to consider some of the larger ideas that I shared here, but also the concrete suggestions in order to allow your people to thrive, to bring the best out of them, and to make them stay and come back and be the best they can possibly be. And that, as a result, will lead to great radio for the community and for the people you're serving. And I think a good way it's to assess that and do this at no cost is by going to learningforpurpose.org/analytics. That's where you find the dashboard, and you can explore it on your own, understand a bit more about it, sign up for it, and encourage your staff to complete the Australian Not-for-Profit Workforce Study, which allows you to gain these insights, allows them personally to get some insights about their situation and reflect on this, and contributes to a national piece of research that is very important, and we hope to make a bigger difference as time moves on.
Excellent. I'd imagine the more people sort of be involved with the study, obviously, the better results that you'll have.
Yes, absolutely, because what we then can do is break it down and not just make universal claims, but for instance say, all right, so what is the situation in Queensland as opposed to Western Australia, or what is the situation in community radio stations as opposed to community legal centers, and what is it that they need, and what is it that should peak body associations listen to or address or provide, and do this on an evidence base as opposed to this is my opinion or my belief or this is what we always have done. And I think this is something that should be done more often like this, and we believe there is a process that we have established, and where there's more to come, that allows some of these good things to happen.
Excellent. Thank you so much for taking the time today to lead this evening's webinar. It's very much appreciated. I hope it sort of didn't cut into your other work too much.
Sorry, say again the last?
I hope it didn't cut into your other work too much.
No, thank you so much. And I would be welcoming any questions you may have. You can find me on the web, or Denny can share my email address. I just shared here, Charlie, so you can...
Yeah, chuck it in the instant message box. If you don't mind me sharing it, I'll include that in the information that I'll send out to people post-webinar. Now, hopefully what's showing up on the screen at the moment is the thank you for joining us page, which includes information about our upcoming webinars. Long-time webinar fans will, of course, know that usually what happens before the conference is that we get we'll do the Youth and Women's Forum beforehand. We're going to flip that this year. Women and Gender Non-Conforming Forum will be happening on 28th of November, and the Youth Forum on the 12th of December. So it's hoped that this year they'll set the agenda as part of the CBAA conference, and then they'll have something meaty to discuss as part of those webinars. So it's 28th of November and 12th of December. And I think that will probably end up doing us for the year 2018 in regards to webinars. As always, if anyone has any suggestions for future webinars they would like to see, because we'll be attacking them in earnest in 2018. And while I don't like to speak on behalf of Helly very often, I can very much say that the CMTO has big plans for their webinars in the year 2019. I don't think I'm speaking out of school on that one. So watch this space for more of that. If you're coming to the CBAA conference, be sure to come and make yourselves familiar with myself and the rest of the staff. If you're not able to, but it's a distinct possibility, please think about doing so. It'd be wonderful to have you there. Ramon, thank you so much for taking the time today to lead the webinar. You've put the email address there. Hopefully everyone's got a chance to copy and paste that into your emails. I don't even know if that was the correct terminology or not. Good on me for not using correct terminology. I'm a radio person after all. But yeah, thank you so much for that. Thank you so much everyone for attending. I hope there wasn't too many people knocking on your door demanding candy from you. as part of Halloween. And I hope that you all have an absolutely fantastic evening. Any final thoughts, though? Sorry, before I cut you off, Ramon.
I don't have final thoughts other than please try it out, and please contact me for any queries or resources or questions you have.
Excellent. Hopefully we'll be talking more and more about it in the near future. Thanks again, everyone, for coming along to this evening's webinar. This is Danny on behalf of the Community Broadcasting Association, my buddy Helly over there at the Community Media Training Organisation. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next time. Bye now.
Bye now.